Everybody's just having a nice time? All right, we are ready to go. Sorry for the late start, but wanted to get everybody sorted out and ready to start. So we are going to be wrestling with something very, very personal. And it's one of the Ten Commandments. So let's make sure we understand, because we're in the book of Devarim, that we get a repeat of the Ten Commandments. Right? Everybody's familiar with that? We get the first version way back in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, and now we get a second version in the book of Deuteronomy. And by version, I don't mean they're wildly different. There are a few nuances which we're going to pick up on. But in particular, we're going to be looking at the last of the list. What's last on the list? And everybody always remembers: don't murder, don't steal, adultery. What? Is coveting the last one? Well, that's going to be the question, right? Covet. That's a word we use all the time.
Yeah.
Now, honestly, does anyone use the word covet except when referring to the Ten Commandments?
Never. Rarely.
I mean, it's a word that has become isolated to only translating the Ten Commandments, which is useless. Because that means when you're translating the Ten Commandments from Hebrew into English, you're translating it into an English word, which only means that last thing in the Ten Commandments, which doesn't tell you what it actually means. It just tells you, oh, it's that thing, right? You might as well just say it's the blah, blah, right? Thou shalt not blah, blah. And from now on, we're going to refer to the last part of the Ten Commandments as blah, blah, and we're not going to blah, blah anymore. Does anybody have any idea what you're not supposed to be doing? Right? What is coveting?
Well, as I understood it, it's being jealous of something that someone else has and wanting it.
Okay, so it's wanting something, we got that, of someone. So does that mean if I drive past the dealer and see a shiny red sports car and I go, ooh, yeah, am I coveting?
No.
It's more.
But
Yes.
someone owns it, not me.
You can appreciate, but it's that desire, right?
So it's
Is there a difference between jealousy and envy?
What's the difference between jealousy and envy?
Jealousy is with hate.
Okay.
Envy is, oh, I love that jacket.
So you're saying is it wanting plus some form of resentment?
Emotion.
But strong emotion, wanting is always going to be a strong emotion. Well, maybe degrees of wanting, but if we add resentment in, now we're coveting. So it's okay to want your neighbor's new sports car. You just can't hate him for having the sports car. And that means it's fine to sit there and every time he's out washing it, come around and drool over it and say, wow. Yeah, you mind if I take it for a spin? How's it handle? Hint, hint. Is that okay? Yes? No?
What's wrong with just admiring something that you think is pretty?
Well, that's
Or
so.
is pleasant, you know? Does that mean you envy it, or just you're just admiring? You make a statement,
Right.
oh, that's a beautiful car, or that's you have a beautiful outfit on. I mean, that's just admiration. I don't think there's anything negative in when you say what you said.
Right. So coveting we don't want it to be don't admire, because we know we're supposed to praise other people's purchases. There's a wonderful discussion in the Talmud about that, where they talk about if someone buys something, you shouldn't insult what they've bought. You should say something nice about it. And when somebody's getting married in the classical system in the Talmud, you should compliment the bride on her beauty. So the admiration doesn't seem like a negative thing at all. So what's coveting then?
Isn't the difference that, so let's use that nice new car. You can want it, and that's wanting it, and desiring it. But if it belongs to someone else, isn't that where it crosses the line? Because we use it with thy neighbor's wife. So thy neighbor's wife belongs to thy neighbor.
So to speak.
Yeah, ish. So isn't that the difference? It's not just admiring, it's wanting something. And it's not just wanting something, wanting the new car, but the new car belongs to you, and that's crossing the line.
So I can't compliment you on your car?
You can admire my new car, but
Right.
you can't want it for yourself. You can get your own wife.
Get your own wife. Get your own car.
I'm just speculating.
Yes, years ago when Jimmy Carter made that
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he has covered.
We are coming back to that. Yes.
Okay. In his heart.
Wow.
Yes.
He's right.
Yeah. 1976. Yep.
In his heart.
Yes.
He loves it.
Well, we're going to get to the quotes on the handout today. So Jimmy Carter made it to the handout today. But let's go ahead and take a look at the actual text of this commandment so that we can have some idea of it. We're going to go ahead and start on page 1116, which is chapter 5, verse 2, the book of Deuteronomy. We're in Vaetchanan. And we're going to start with verse 6. 1016.
Oh, 16.
Did I give that wrong number? Sorry. 1016. 1016. Chapter 5, verse 2. How are we doing?
Oh, yeah.
We found it?
Yep.
All right. Last line on the page is the beginning of the Deuteronomic repetition of the 10 Commandments. So we're just going to go through the 10. Are you volunteering, Harriet?
Yes.
Okay.
I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image, any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters below the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlement, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day.
All right. One more.
Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may long endure, and that you may fare well in the land that the Lord your God is assigning you.
All right. That's the first 5.
Okay.
All right. Everyone got those? If you need a review, remember they're on the big tablets hanging outside the sanctuary, with one small spelling mistake. There's a spelling mistake on those arc doors. Now you have to go and try and figure out which word's misspelled. And I'll give you a hint, it is in the first 5. All right, so that should be enough to narrow it down. Any questions on those before we proceed to the second half? All right, second half.
You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor.
All right, that's the next 4, which leaves us with...
You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not crave your neighbor's house, or his field, or his male or female slave, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's.
Okay. That's an unusual verse, isn't it? I mean, I know it sounds very normal in English, but there's precision in Hebrew in the Torah, right? The word choice is very, very important. And there's something odd about that way that verse is structured, because it seems like we've actually been given 2 prohibitions in that verse.
Not covet, not crave.
Not covet and not crave. Those are 2 different words in the Hebrew. And what is the difference? Welcome to today's lesson. Right, so we have this one word, tahmod, which is the classic word that's translated as covet all over the place, and again, which is something that's hard for us to get a grip on. And then we have this other word, titavet, which is being translated here as crave. It can also be translated, you'll see, as desire. And those two are going to be balanced off each other as we try to understand each of them. And that's where we're going to run. Okay? All right, so let's get the handout out so we've got something to look at.
In the Hebrew, we use titaveh in other,
Absolutely,
but not the first
absolutely.
one. I've not seen that.
Tachmod is
Not so often.
less common in modern Hebrew. Okay, how are we doing? All around? All around. All right. So, Harriet, I know you would love to quote Jimmy Carter.
Yes. I've been waiting to do this. I've looked on a lot of women with lust. I've committed adultery in my heart many times.
So, famous quote from Jimmy Carter in a Playboy interview. I don't know if you knew that's where he originally said this. He was being interviewed by Playboy and just decided to share this. But, I mean, come on. He's committed adultery in his heart.
As I understood it, even when I heard him say this, I listened, I said, that may be Christian, but it's not Jewish at all. Because what you think isn't important to God. It's what you actually do. I don't care that you might think about helping the poor or don't want to help them. I want you to do it anyway. So if he didn't actually do the adultery, whatever was going on in his heart, you know, your thoughts are your thoughts. Oh,
So-
I'm getting in trouble because coveting is thought
Well, that's the question.
Yeah.
Thought versus action.
versus action. That's right.
We are, and you're phrasing it very, very well, Harriet. We are trained as Jews to focus over here on action, right? As the example you gave, good intentions to the poor doesn't put food on their table. You have to actually go out and help them. And if you help them while hating them, you still get full points, right?
Exactly.
Yes? Everybody's okay with that?
Yes.
Rambam didn't say anything about a ladder of hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah?
That's,
Well, they don't have to. You don't have to say, "I'm the one who helped you." That's a whole different thing. That's
you aren't
know,
supposed to, but I never
But-
thought of it as hating, because who hates the person who they help? But you're right, that
So maybe there is a slight difference between doing the right thing for the wrong reason and doing the right thing for the right reason or with the right intention.
I think there's a huge.
A huge difference.
no difference.
But at the end of the day,
I'm on the no difference.
but at the end of the day, with the teacher in the room, you get the same grade if you got the same result for the test.
right.
I mean, if I'm a
You-
poor person and I'm
You
hungry,
sit in class and you've got the nastiest attitude towards the subject you can imagine, but when it comes time to take the final, you get all the questions right. Your grade is going to be the same as the person sitting next to you who loved the class and had a great attitude and was such a good part of the class the whole time, right? I mean, the test is what you do, not your attitude, not your emotions, not your feelings about something. It's what do you do.
well, from the hungry person's point of view, I'm the one who's hungry,
Mhm.
and you finally come home with some food. I don't care that you don't like giving it to me, that you don't want to. You're feeding me. I just want to eat. I'm so glad that you fed me. I don't look into the reasoning behind what, if you didn't have the right attitude, will I push it away?
Because you mean people who are poor have no pride at all. They have no
No.
sense of
No, the
self-esteem.
good deed was done. The good deed that you gave me what I needed. Why does it matter so much to me?
So much. That little so much
You
is a
like
little
it.
caveat you threw in there.
But when we stand in judgment,
Mhm.
that is when it's going to make a difference. It doesn't matter what you think. It matters what God thinks. And God looks on the heart. He knows the intent of the heart. And if you've done something just to fulfill something that somebody told you to
The
do,
mitzvah, God's commandments. I've done it to fulfill God's commandment.
Well,
I
no,
but
but
I did it
but
anyway.
I'm saying.
I love the way Susan said
Yeah.
it through gritted teeth.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yes.
Take your food and shut up, to come back to that example. You're right. The person who is hungry that has now been fed will be much happier with the food than without. Certainly. They're probably not going to be happy the way that they were fed. And we would perhaps expect that God would bring that to our attention, that we did it in the wrong way, that we did it with the wrong spirit. But we're sort of uncomfortable with that because, we, the Jewish people, would we say that Jimmy Carter had committed adultery?
Never.
Right? Would we prosecute him under Jewish law for having committed adultery? No. So therefore, it's fine for people, men, women, to walk around and look at other people and imagine doing all sorts of things with them. That's perfectly fine. No problem there.
But we're not sitting in the position of God.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying for our judgment. I'm talking about if someone was to come to you and say, you know what, I'm constantly thinking about my neighbor's wife, and she's just so whatever. I'm not going to ever do anything on it, but it's okay for me to have an active fantasy life, right?
Apparently not, because I can see that if you have this active fantasy life, it's not a very big step eventually to carry it out.
All right, so let's talk about some steps. All right, and to do that, we're going to look at our text. Now, I quoted the text here on the page so that we would be able to highlight the tachmod and titaveh, the two forms, right? And one being covet and the other being crave or desire. And let's go ahead and see how our tradition has understood this nebulous word covet as well as its partner desire.
So it's
So we're
do
gonna-
not covet
exactly.
tachmod, your fellow's wife, and do not crave or desire titaveh, your fellow's house.
Now, notice obviously in English, we probably would have reversed those because we're used to using the word desire for people more than objects. Set aside for lust, exactly. So set aside your English predilections and let's just stick with the way the text was written.
You shall not covet is generally understood by people to pertain to something for which one is not ready to pay.
All right, so don't actively desire something if you're not prepared to pony up for it, right? It goes along with the notion of you don't walk into the dealership, to go back to our sports car analogy, and ask for a test drive and ask about all the options and everything if you have no ability or no intention of actually buying. Under no matter what lease deal you offer me, there's no way I'm walking off the lot with this car. Bava Metzia and other parts points out that that's not permitted under Jewish law. You can't do test drive as your afternoon activity just for fun. Exactly, it's considered a form of deception and of abusing the person who's there. And I know people will say, "Oh, but the dealer doesn't mind," because they're getting their cars out. There's people on the lots. Doesn't matter whether they mind or not. It is an incorrect practice.
So I was thinking that's not a very helpful comment. Interpretation is not very helpful, but then I thought in relationships, to have a relationship with someone when you really have no intention of marrying them per se. or something.
The one night stand
really
type
can't
thing.
take this, maybe have it be a little more helpful. Because it's a very simple.
Well, you're right. There's a reason why I'm starting off with this one, because it doesn't have much depth to it. It's a nice general sort of rule, and it's easy to remember. And sort of as we say, keep it in your pocket to remind yourself. You don't waste the salesperson's time about something if you're not prepared to pay. And in the old world, when people would buy things from each other, not just from shops, you wouldn't haggle with your neighbor about his new wagon, car, if you had no intention whatsoever of buying it or weren't able to.
In biblical times, what would that have been in biblical?
Well, it would have been, your neighbor has a lovely parcel of land that you would like to purchase and attach to yours, right? Because your neighbors, and you really can't afford it or pay, but you want it so much because it would just be so good. And you're nudging and nudging and nudging about it. And have you thought about selling me that land again? But you really can't buy it, right? That seems to be a very narrow, limited view of don't covet, but one that I think most of us could understand. It's not such a good activity to engage in. But again, we're still on the idea of sort of nudging, of an action, right? You just shouldn't do that kind of thing. All right, let's keep going and see if we can get some more meat on the bone here.
Since there is already a prohibition on adultery, this means you should not try to get your neighbor to divorce his wife so you can marry her.
All right, so again, where are we on the thought versus action chart?
Now we're moving along to action.
Right.
This is much closer to action.
But is it wrong?
Well, there's also deception in that statement. Where
You mean about getting your neighbor to divorce his wife?
Right.
You mean, so every time your neighbor comes over and complains to you about his wife,
Say,
and you're interested in her, you shouldn't deliberately feed the fires of resentment and anger,
Yes.
but we're still on the action side.
Right.
Now, you're right, there may be some deception because you're not telling your neighbor, well, man, if you divorced her, I would marry her in a minute. So you're maybe withholding that truth, but are you actually necessarily lying? Right? If you point out her flaws that drive him nuts, and hoping that maybe he'll divorce her because then you can court her. What?
Planting the seed.
Planting the seed, and maybe putting a little extra water on the seed. but not through lying, just, have another drink. Yeah, you tell her, and
It's still self-serving, a selfish thing.
I can't be selfish. No, but I didn't necessarily do an actual act that's wrong. That's what Chizkuni's pointing out here. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't go over and seduce his wife while he was out somewhere and actually sleep with her. I'm just helping him to realize that he doesn't really want to be married with her. Because, I'll be a much better husband.
You'll make her happier.
Of course I would, right? So isn't that okay? Well, according to Chizkuni, no, because it's the last of the 10 Commandments and it says don't do that. But we got to still sort of figure out, why can't I do that if it seems like that would be a lovely loophole, right? I'm not actually committing adultery. I'm just helping her to become available. Okay, a little bit more.
Crave is another word for covet.
All right, so
Now, I know
Rashi.
Rashi didn't say it that way.
Well, he said it in Hebrew.
Yes.
But what he was trying to say was that titaveh is a synonym of tachmod, right? That our word that we're translating as crave or desire is a synonym for the word tachmod, for the word we're translating as covet. And what he's basically saying is here, don't read the two as being two separate things, right? When it says don't covet and when it says don't desire, that's just poetic license by the author to use two separate words. It's not actually trying to draw a distinction between the two of them. Now, other commentators are going to argue back against this and say, no, there actually is a distinction between that verb and the other verb, that coveting and desiring are technically two different things. And in fact, there are some authors or commentators that say these are two separate commandments, that these are commandments 9 and 10, and they reshuffle some of the other commandments to make it up to the total of 10 rather than ending up with 11. So there are some that take this language so strongly, which doesn't appear back in Exodus, when the first version of the 10 Commandments, as saying these are actually two commandments.
It's also interesting because it says, don't covet his wife, very specific example, and don't crave his house. You might think that it would be craving his wife and coveting the house. But by putting those two nouns in place, we wouldn't.
Right.
It indicates it may mean something more than what we're looking at.
It may be more than just what we're used to. All right, so let's go to Ibn Ezra, who really goes to town on this whole concept.
The Hebrew verb covet can sometimes mean not just to covet, but to seize because of covetousness.
All right, so what Ibn Ezra seems to be doing at the start is saying covet, most of us think of as a thought. It can be an action. And he's going to give us a proof text for this, right? Because most of us, I think we would say, like in English, if I say, I really covet this, there's no action implied other than mental action. But he's going to point out that in Hebrew, there is reason for looking at covet as an action.
Because in Exodus, for example, the verse cannot be saying that no one will covet your land, because that would imply that the land was a bad one.
All right, so way back in Exodus, when it talks about everybody going up to Jerusalem during the holidays, the Chagim, there is a reassurance. Because most of us, I think, if we were used to the idea of raiding parties and nations across the border that might like to attack us, would think, if everybody's in Jerusalem, who's watching my farm? Who's keeping the bandits out, right? Who's keeping the next door country from invading if we're all in one place at one time? The whole country is essentially going to be empty of defenders 3 times every year. How's that going to work? And Exodus says, don't worry. When this happens during these time periods, no one will covet your land. Okay, so now we might read, Ibn Ezra says, covet as a thought, as by saying no one's going to even want your land during these times. But if you did that, you'd be insulting the land of Israel. Right? No one's even going to want your land. How could you say that? This is the most desirable piece of real estate in the world. And we've seen in the 20th century and 21st that it still seems to have that status, because we spend more time and attention arguing about this little sliver of land than enormous areas elsewhere. So that must mean there's something else being promised here.
The other usage of the verb, of course, is indeed to covet without taking action to acquire what one covets.
Okay, so he's saying there's 2 versions. There's covet by thought and covet by action. And he says sometimes covet means to try to take because you want it so much. And that's what that whole verse in Exodus is talking about. No one will covet your land means no one will invade. It doesn't just mean they won't like it. It means they won't act on their likingness of it. Their likingness?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's English. No one will act on how much they desire. They will be somehow thwarted from being able to take what they want, even though you're not there to defend it. Okay, so he didn't really settle our argument, though, did he?
To just distinguish between.
Because he gave us two versions. He says, okay, so don't covet could mean don't think about stuff you want, or it could mean don't try and take the stuff you want in ways that you shouldn't. But which one is it? It's kind of important to know what the commandment actually is. I can see how in Exodus 34, it means that they're not going to try and take our stuff. But what am I supposed to do with this commandment? Is it really just saying, if you really like your neighbor's car, you shouldn't steal it? Or is it trying to say something else?
If someone wants to steal something, but can't because the other person is stronger or he fears the authorities, he still violates this commandment.
All right, so Ramban, Nachmanides, gives us a little twist, right? What does he do to reconcile these two? The thought and action.
They're both the same. If you think about it, and you would like to do it, but the thing is stopping you is not that you wouldn't do such a thing, but that you're afraid the police will come and get you, then you have violated the commandment. You've gone too far in your thought.
If your thought led you to plan an action, and the only thing that stopped you from the action was the cop or the fact that the guy would beat you up, then you still have violated to not covet. Right? So is the essence then of coveting, hello? Is the essence then of the transgression of coveting action or thought? It's still a little ambiguous, right? Because he's only said, if you were ready to act, but get thwarted, that you're still in transgression. He doesn't say, if you think about it a lot, but don't quite get ready to make out the plan. You haven't bought the lockpick set. You know, it's but you really deeply want it, and maybe you're still resisting. Have you transgressed or not?
If you go and buy that lockpick, now you're violating an earlier command that said don't steal. It doesn't say don't think about stealing. It says don't do it.
But I only bought the lockpick set.
I know, but this one
I haven't used it yet.
At this point, the thinking has gone too far.
Okay, there's such
Even if you don't do the action, the thinking.
Oh, wait a minute, Harry, earlier on,
I
you
know.
told me that
I know,
thinking
yes.
didn't count.
That's right. You're right.
You told me it was action that mattered. And now you're telling me that there's such a thing as thinking too far?
One Jew, two opinions.
Okay, well,
But it's a lot more difficult to control your thoughts than it is your actions.
is it? You're anticipating very well the direction we're heading. All right. What does it mean to, if we settle on the idea of don't covet, the thing that probably makes us uncomfortable is saying it's easier to keep my hand from picking a lock than it is to keep my brain from scheming about how I might steal that car. Because, you know, brains do what brains do. They're full of all of these ideas and things.
Just thinking about that woman next door.
Or thinking about the woman next door. I'm going, you know, her husband's left. He's usually gone about 4 or 5 hours. And the last time I was over, you know, she winked at me. Oh, no. Have I gone too far? I didn't actually go next door. Didn't call her up. Right? I was just sort of working through my mind the possibility, and then stopped. Did I do something wrong?
Yes, you've entertained the thought.
I've entertained the thought. So Jimmy Carter was right.
I think so.
So, in the one we just read by Ramban,
Mhm.
he's saying, and I like this example of the husband's wife. It's the most, it seems to make sense. So, I really like her, but oh man, her husband's a big guy. So
He would
that's what Ramban's saying here.
Exactly
He
right.
fears it. But now we're taking him out
But
of the equation.
exactly, but if the husband was gone,
We're taking him out of it, but so you're thinking, well, he's gone. If I just go over and ask to borrow a pencil,
mhm. We'll see what
We haven't
happens.
addressed that yet.
We haven't really addressed that yet. If you're thinking about it, but you haven't actually committed it, but you really, really, really are thinking about it, have you done something wrong?
We're
Is
talking
that- is
about,
that-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
No, go.
no.
I was clarifying, asking, what do you mean, how do you think about it?
Okay.
Same
Fantasize.
thing. That's-
Okay, so
That's what I was,
can't you just fantasize? I thought I'm not actually even planning, what I'm going to ask for when I get to the door.
thinking of her
I'm just
big heart.
sitting at home,
Yeah.
sitting on my sofa, and I'm daydreaming, right? And I'm not really going to do it, but she is the co-star of my daydream. Is that a problem?
So there's distinguishing between thinking about her and thinking about action.
About how to get her.
So that's where we're heading, right?
That is what we need to clarify, exactly, because otherwise we're not going to
Did
know.
we decide it's okay, I did in my mind, it's okay to like something good, think of chocolate, put chocolate instead of, the car, what a pretty car, I love that Mustang, that is the coolest Mustang ever.
And I think we understand that there is a baseline that you are allowed to like things in the world. The question is, at what point does liking become liking, right? To use the junior high vernacular, right? I don't just like him. I like him. I say.
I can like the Mercedes convertible,
Mhm.
but I would never want, even if I could afford it, I wouldn't want to own one.
Oh, I'd love one.
Oh dear, Susan, you might be in trouble. Well, let's see.
You've been on my Mercedes.
It has to belong to someone else too, right? We
But
have to-
Well, everything belongs to someone.
You're talking about
So it belongs to
adultery
people.
now.
Yeah.
Well,
You
I
have-
guess. That's why I like talking about.
Well, remember-
When does coveting become the neighbor's wife?
Right.
Become adultery with the neighbor's wife?
Well, it becomes adultery with the neighbor's wife when you're both undressed and in the same room and doing things.
Or we're talking about now the crossover.
Well,
What?
but as Cooney pointed out, we have a prohibition on adultery, right? So technically, Jewish law is quite clear that Jimmy Carter did not commit adultery, but did he commit a transgression of covetousness, which is its own prohibition? And that's what we're trying to clarify, right? So yes, technically he did not commit adultery, but he may have transgressed this commandment. And how do we know whether he did or didn't? Okay, so let's get some more Ibn Ezra, because he's so good on this.
Many would assert that there can be no sin committed simply by thinking,
In fact, I think I've heard that in this room today.
and that reward and punishment do not apply to one's thoughts. However, there are many proofs that they are wrong. I will not go on at length about this, but I would just show them a mind that hatches evil plots from Proverbs.
Thank you.
And God saying to David, as for your wanting to build a house for my name, you do well to want that.
Right, in the book of Chronicles, David is praised, almost rewarded for having the desire to want to build the temple. Even though he doesn't get to do it,
Right.
it seems almost as though God is saying, Yasher Koach on the idea. You get full marks as though you did it. And indeed, Midrash goes on to say that David received full marks as though he himself had built it because he wanted to. So, if I can be rewarded for good thoughts, why can't I be punished for bad thoughts?
Do good, O Lord, to the good, to the upright in heart.
And heart, remember, is in biblical metaphor, is a symbol not just of emotion, but of thinking and thoughts as well. Heart and mind are sort of blended together in the image of heart in biblical writings.
And not least, it says, no, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it.
Right, which is talking about Torah just later on in the book of Deuteronomy, right up near the end, and it's in your heart. So apparently you have to observe it in your heart, not just in your action. Right, that's the point that Ibn Ezra is trying to make. Why don't we go ahead and...
In fact, the whole point of the commandments is to set the heart on the right path. Most of them are merely reminders about correct behavior. The very fact that one who deliberately violates a commandment is treated differently than one who violates it inadvertently ought to convince them.
All right, so he concludes, he has a whole set of proof texts that shows that the Tanakh does seem to care about what we think and feel. And then he goes on to say, look, there's two more points here I want to make. One, which is his final clincher, right, is somebody who goes out and deliberately murders a person is held to a much higher standard of crime and punishment than somebody who is out with a friend or even a stranger and accidentally kills them. Right? The Torah is very explicit in saying that what you wanted to do is very important for understanding how you should be punished and what the reckoning should be. Right? Your intention makes a difference, even though the action, which is that guy's now dead, makes there's no difference in the action. There's still no pulse. But what you thought before the action changes radically the effect of that action on the whole system of righteousness and justice. Is that a pretty compelling argument that thought matters?
Mm-hmm.
But would thought matter in that case without the action? Right? We're saying thought colors the action, but if there was no action to color, would the thought still matter? If I thought about killing the guy next door, but didn't actually do it, am I a killer?
Well, David building the temple.
David building the temple, he got reward for wanting to, even though he never put brick down.
God honors the desire.
Right? So if God honored the desire, then God should also honor our negative desires and punish accordingly. But why then is this a separate commandment? Right? If God was going to punish us for our thoughts of transgressing some commandment, then God would not need this commandment in the list, because you would just be guilty of the central, whatever the commandment, the actual commandment, the action commandment, right? If I am guilty of stealing because I want to steal, even though I don't, then you don't have to punish me for wanting to steal, you just punish me for stealing. If I am guilty of adultery, even though I don't act on it, but because I thought about doing it, then you don't need to add a new line to the Ten Commandments saying that you're guilty for thinking of it. Right? If thought and action are one and the same, you don't need this. Right? This whole don't covet isn't a separate commandment. It should just be a note somewhere in the appendix saying, oh, by the way, thinking about it's the same as doing. That covers everything mentioned above.
Does it depend upon what thought and what action? I'm not explaining that.
Mm-hmm. You mean, is it a case-by-case thing?
Yeah, is it a situation where depending upon what the action might be,
Mm-hmm.
the thought of doing it can make a difference?
So,
As to whether it's
so if I sit and I think about making a fire on Shabbat, I'm wondering whether we might judge that differently than I'm sitting and plotting about having an affair with my neighbor's wife. Is there a difference? Or do we think that the system of Torah should handle those two cases differently?
So the severity, my question is, does the severity of the thought
Mm-hmm.
matter?
That's a good question. I'm going to go back to that middle part, the in fact of Ibn Ezra's line there, which is the fourth line from the bottom, where he says the whole point of the commandments is to set the heart on the right path. Is doing something very, well, it's not novel, but it's something that is often missed, which is we usually draw the arrow of causality this way, right? I think about doing something and then I do it. What Ibn Ezra is introducing here is that the commandments are not just about whether we act or don't act about on our thoughts. The actions we do also impact what we think and how we feel and what we want and what we desire. Right, that's a little bit radical? Yes? Maybe? Good. Turn the page over. Ibn Ezra continues.
Many people cannot understand how someone can be expected not to covet something desirable.
Right? Isn't that one of our basic problems with this whole commandment? Even if we're talking about the most extreme type of coveting, I'm planning and wanting to do it, it's natural to have those thoughts, right? It just happens. So how can this be ruled out as a thou shalt not? That doesn't seem natural. Ibn Ezra is going to explain how it can work.
Let me give you an example. A peasant of sound mind who sees a beautiful princess will not even think of sleeping with her, knowing that it is impossible. It is not that he is mentally defective. Obviously, one could imagine that one had wings and was flying, though this is even more impossible. Rather, it is the same as not wanting to sleep with one's mother, no matter how beautiful she is, because one has been raised knowing that this is forbidden.
All right. So what's Ibn Ezra's point here about this whole idea of whether or not it's possible to not covet something that's nice? What's he trying to say?
You can,
Possible.
It's possible. How is it possible to not covet something nice?
Right, but
No, but how is that possible? What's he trying to say? What mechanism makes this possible? It just
Training to some extent.
it sounds like training is what he's saying, right? That if you're raised the right way, if you're trained the right way, the same way you're not going to think about, thinking about sleeping with your mom, no matter what she looks like, because that's just, no, we don't do that. So too, and his example is obviously from a very different social time than ours. He believes that a peasant who sees a princess, no matter how beautiful she is not going to even entertain the notion of sleeping with her, because that's just not what peasants and princesses do, right? Sorry, Disney, it just doesn't work like that. And in their time, in their day, it was almost as unimaginable as having wings and flying, which does speak an awful lot of what the Middle Ages were like in terms of the social structure, and why Disney movies never would have worked back then, because everyone would have said that doesn't make any sense. The magic, I believe, but the prince and the pauper and the princess, that's just too ridiculous. Yeah, they would have been fine with the magic part. It's just a matter of training, right? If you're raised right, you'll only want what you should want, and you won't want what you shouldn't want. And he goes on to say,
since, as our sages have pointed out, life, children, and sustenance are dependent not on one's merit, but on one's stars. So the enlightened person will, like the peasant in my example, not covet anything, but will rejoice in his own lot.
it's dependent on my stars. What?
Yeah, right.
yeah, that was.
Who said what to who now? What?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, first of all, understand the point of that, and then we're going to come back to the stars. He's trying to say, if you resign yourself to your fate, if you accept that who you're married to, the kids you've got, your occupation, your livelihood or lack thereof is pretty much just fate, then you'll stop wanting stuff, right? Because you can't want something that you won't have if you're not destined to have it. And if you are destined to have it, wanting it in advance doesn't help, because it's going to come your way eventually anyway. So you might as well just sit back and take what life gives you and be happy with what you got. That's not the American way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marian. That is so antithetical to our modern thinking.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard to get our head around it. I mean, he is reading this as a sense of astrological destiny, right? If you were born at a certain time under certain star signs in a certain place, you're just going to end up with a certain type of life. And what you do with it, how you accept it or don't accept it, that's up to you. But the fact that you're going to be a peasant farmer or the fact that you're going to be a princess was handed to you by destiny. So just get used to it, be happy with what you got, and we'll move on. That doesn't work for most of us nowadays, because we see that you can change your stars. Right? It doesn't matter where you were born. You can, under the right circumstances that might help, or with the right character, get just about anywhere. That kind of makes it hard to accept this. But there's still a kernel of truth that he's touching on. I think his comment, in my humble opinion, is very heavily shaded by the time in which he lived. But there is a kernel of truth of, if you are happy with what you have, then you can begin to control what you desire. Right? If you are happy in your married life, then you're not going to be prone to daydreaming about your neighbor's wife. If you are happy that you have a car that gets you from point A to B, you're not going to necessarily be daydreaming about shooting down the highway in your neighbor's little convertible. If you're content, your covetingness will be reduced. There is some truth to that.
Yes.
Right? To be satisfied is to reduce our desires. That makes some sense? But is that really putting covetousness under our control? Or is it just kind of a knock-on effect of, being happy? If I'm happy, then I'm not going to covet, but if I'm not happy, I will covet. So now I'm going to be punished because I'm already unhappy, which will make me more unhappy, right? Every time now that I'm miserable because I lost my job and lost my house and my wife left me, and I look at my neighbor's wife and go, man, I wish I had a wife like that. Now it's even worse because I wanted to. Right? It's just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The happier you are, the less you'll desire, the happier you are. And if you're unhappy, you'll want more things that you don't have, and that will make you more depressed, and then you're just off into misery land. All right. Don't worry, we're going to pull out of this nosedive. It's not going to be easy, by the way, but we are going to pull out, I promise.
We were forbidden to set our mind too long for what belongs to another, because fixing one's mind on a desire for that object will be a cause of carrying out a scheme to take it from him, even though it's not his wish to sell it, either by purchase or exchange, or brute force if we cannot do it any other way.
All right, so Sefer HaChinuch, as always, gives a very nice summary of the core of the mitzvah, which is don't set your mind to long for, right? That's not too long, meaning like for an excessive length of time. That is the correct spelling of the word to, right? Don't decide to want something that belongs to another. Because if you fix your mind on something that belongs to another, you will eventually come to try and carry out a scheme to get it. And you may do it by nudging, you may do it by hook or by crook, you may do it by force. Eventually you're going to do something wrong in the process of trying to get what you've chosen to want. Okay? That's what he's going off as the basic definition of coveting, right? Choosing to want something that isn't yours. And that choice is what will get you into trouble. Okay? How are we doing so far on that? Okay? Expect a little more pushback on that, but we'll see. It's going to come back.
About this, it was stated, neither shall you desire your neighbor's house, which is right. And Rambam wrote that the two precepts, you shall not covet, and neither shall you desire, in this portion, are not redundant prohibitions about one theme, but are rather two subjects. Covet forbids us to take in any way, for money or without money, what someone else has acquired if he does not wish to sell that thing. While desire forbids us even the longing for it within our heart. For with the longing desire, he will come to beseech him and importune him to sell it or give it to him in exchange for another object under all circumstances. Now, even though one of these injunctions draws the other along with it, they are reckoned as two nonetheless.
All right, so what he's basically saying is that covet is a very particular form of action, right? To covet something is to begin to scheme, even within the bounds of what is normal commerce, but to begin to scheme to wheedle something out of another person's possession. Eventually, it may be in another forbidden way, stealing or adultery, but even if you get it by just making yourself such a pest that the person sells it to you to shut you up, you've violated the act of coveting, right? But it's an act of coveting. Whereas titaveh, the craving, he's saying is very clearly a thought. And you are liable for that thought. That is to say, if you think it, you have transgressed. Partly because it will lead you to that, right? But even if it doesn't necessarily automatically lead you there today, you're still responsible for that thought before it has done any actual damage. Actual damage. Okay? Yes, there's a bit of a pump, but trying to emphasize that really what he's trying to say here is that the thought itself is a prohibition, is prohibited, which I'm sure makes many of us uncomfortable, right? Prohibited thoughts.
So Barbara's box of chocolate.
I know, I was thinking about
Okay.
Don't think about it. Don't think about the white elephant, right? I thought of it now.
So if you sit there for 5 days
Mm-hmm.
and you're salivating.
You've got a very good image there, yes.
Yeah.
and eventually, chances are you're going to act on it.
All right. So I made it a little bit worse by adding in very clearly that craving is wrong, in addition to acting upon those cravings. But we are going to pull out. Okay? I'm making it worse so that the pull-up is stronger.
Do not wonder and ask, but how can it be in a man's power to restrain his heart from longing for the treasure of every precious vessel that he may see in his fellow's possession, when he is in want and deprived of them all? How can the Torah demand something to which we cannot measure up?
And so there's a basic principle in Jewish law that the Torah asks us nothing, and the sages ask nothing of us but what can be fulfilled. There's no impossible mitzvah. There's no commandment of God that is impossible for us to fulfill. But if we're describing this, or titave, as craving, if we're saying that just means you want something that someone else has, how in the world can we live up to that? It's natural, especially if I am poor. That's what they mean by if I am in want or deprived of everything. Of course, it's natural for me to look at somebody who has more and to want what that person has. So you're just setting me up for failure. That doesn't seem fair. And Sefer HaChinuch isn't buying it. He's saying, no, that is a sloppy excuse. That you are in more control than you think.
None but wicked fools who are sinful would speak so. It is indeed in one's power to restrain oneself, one's thoughts and desires from whatever one wishes. It lies in one's free choice and decision to repel one's desire or draw near to it in all matters as one wishes. One's heart is given in one's control.
Okay? No, says Sefer HaChinuch. You don't get to say, I can't control what I want. It's just the way I feel.
I couldn't help it.
I couldn't help wanting it. I mean, okay, fine. We can all agree that even wheedling someone until they give it to you, that's probably wrong, and we're okay with that. But I can't help what I want. And Sefer HaChinuch says, yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can choose what you want and don't want. Even in your thoughts. But notice the way he does it. This is what is, I think, very, very insightful and what's going to save us from being damned by having bad random thoughts. What he says is, it lies in one's free choice and decision to repel one's desire or draw near to it. It goes all the way back to the first paragraph, where I mentioned the opening, which is, it's up to you how you choose to respond when you notice that desire in you. And it's that response that you are held responsible for. Right? So if you see your neighbor's wife out sunbathing in her bikini and you think, wow, that, yes, is beyond your control. But the next thought you have is in your control. And that next thought is either, I shouldn't be thinking that, or what's wrong, that's just wrong. Or, that's the choice you get. Right? So yes, that spontaneous thought, that spontaneous craving, that is just going to happen. But the very next instant, how you choose to respond to what you have now set your eyes on, that is in your power. And the more you train yourself to stop that from becoming an active craving, the more the thoughts will diminish, as it were. Right? If you fantasize about every woman you see down the street, I'm talking to a room full of women. If you fantasize about every man you see walking down the street, sorry, it's gender-heavy language in the original text that lends itself to a particular view. But if you imagine yourself desiring every single person that you're walking down the street, and you think there's nothing wrong with that, it's perfectly harmless, and you come up with elaborate fantasies about every person you see, it will only become more and more common for you to desire everyone you see. But if, when you see somebody that you desire, that they're not single and you're not single, and it's not a good thing to try to be deciding whether or not this is a match, because it ain't a match. They're already matched, and so are you. If you turn away from that desire, not you can't not prevent it from happening, because we can't always prevent the thought from popping in, but if you turn away from that desire, you haven't transgressed. And you will find eventually that you stop randomly having fantasy thoughts about people on the street. Does that make sense? Right? So there is that if you want to use Freud, there was that id, right? That urge that comes from the primordial part of our spirit that says live, go, breed, acquire, right? All that deep bass voice that tells us to do these things. And then we have to say, that one's a good idea, that one's not. And that is a choice. And it may be a mental action, but it is still within our free will to choose how to act upon that impulse. We can't just say, you know, I can't help what I feel, but you can help how you respond to it, even internally. Onward.
If someone transgresses this and sets his mind to long for something that another has.
Notice the phrasing, right? Sets his mind. It's not just he happens to think of it.
But he consciously
Sets
It's that you're right, my id. That is a wonderful car, that is a wonderful house, that is a wonderful donkey, that is a wonderful whatever. And I'm just going to think about it and obsess about it. And every time it pops into my head, I'm going to savor the fantasy of having it. You have transgressed.
That violates the negative precept. But it entails no flogging or whiplashes, since it involves no physical action. Yet his punishment will be very great, since it is a cause of many misfortunes, as is evident in the incident of Ahab and Naboth.
Okay, so you don't get punished for this by the physical court, but because it doesn't have a physical action. So that comes back full circle, that our instincts at the very beginning of the class were right, that without a physical action, it's not quite the same thing as with the physical action. But recognize, as he's pointing out by the example from the Book of Kings, setting your heart on something and not turning away from desiring something that you can't have is going to eventually get you in trouble. Entertaining the fantasy over and over and over again willingly and enjoying that thought is eventually going to lead your obsession into an action which will have a physical consequence. And you have to stop it where it starts. Right? So there are such things as harmful daydreams, depending upon how you respond to them. Sound good? Questions? Comments? Okay. Thank you very much.